The sun hung low over Lexington, Kentucky, painting the streets in shades of gold. Cars passed quietly, and people hurried home after a long day. In a police cruiser parked near Ashland Avenue, Officer Mark Anderson leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the road. His partner, Emily Carter, sat beside him, finishing notes from their last call. It was a slow evening, until a black sedan rolled past them. Mark's gaze followed it, his jaw tightening. Behind the wheel was a woman, black, confident, neatly dressed in a navy blue suit. Her posture was straight, her hands calm on the steering wheel. Everything about her looked professional and put together. But somehow that irritated Mark. "Look at that," he muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with quiet judgment. "Nice car. I bet she's up to something." Emily glanced up, confused. "She's not speeding, Mark. She's following the rules." Her tone was cautious. She knew how he could get when he made up his mind about someone. Mark didn't answer. He reached forward and flicked on the patrol lights. The red and blue glow bounced off nearby buildings as he pulled onto the street. Emily's stomach dropped. "Mark, really?" she said softly. "What's the reason for the stop?" He smirked. "Just doing my job." The sedan slowed and signaled before pulling neatly to the curb. The woman's movements were calm, practiced. Through the windshield, Emily noticed her shoulders tense just slightly. Something in her stillness told Emily this wasn't her first time being pulled over for no reason. Mark stepped out of the car, his boots heavy against the pavement. Emily hesitated, then followed. "Mark, you don't even have probable cause," she whispered. He brushed her off. "Stay back, rookie. I've been doing this 20 years. I know a suspect when I see one." When they reached the driver's side, the window lowered smoothly. The woman turned to them with quiet confidence. "Good evening, officers," she said, her voice even. "Is there a problem?" Her tone wasn't defensive, just calm, controlled. That seemed to annoy Mark even more. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring her question. Without a word, the woman reached into her purse slowly, placing both hands on the wheel before passing the documents through the window. Emily noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. Not fear, restraint. Mark snatched the papers and stepped back to the patrol car, glancing over them. "Grace Williams," he read aloud. "What brings you to this part of town, Miss Williams?" "I'm on my way to a meeting," she said. Her voice stayed steady, polite. Mark gave a mocking laugh. "Some meeting? Driving a car like this?" Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She looked around. The street was quiet, but a few people had stopped to watch. The air felt heavier now. "Mark," Emily said quietly. "She's cooperating." Don't make this worse, but Mark wasn't listening. He stepped closer to the car again, his shadow falling across Grace's face. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Grace blinked, her expression calm but firm. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I said step out." She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door slowly. As soon as she stood, Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the car. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the doorframe. "That's enough," Emily blurted, stepping forward. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Mark shot her a cold glare. "Stay out of this." Grace straightened her jacket, meeting his eyes. "This is harassment, Officer Anderson," she said quietly. "I know my rights." Mark leaned in closer. "Out here, rights are what I say they are." The street felt tense, like a wire pulled tight. Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Grace's bag slipped from her shoulder, spilling onto the ground. Keys, a phone, a small notepad. She bent to pick them up, her movements calm despite the insult. "Mark, stop," Emily said again, her voice shaking. "We don't have cause for this." He crouched, picking up one of Grace's cards and inspecting it as if it were evidence. "You've got a lot to learn, rookie," he said. "This is how you keep the streets clean." Grace's voice stayed calm. "You're violating my rights, Officer Anderson." "I've done nothing wrong." Mark ignored her, still searching her things. Emily felt heat rise in her chest, anger, guilt, fear. This wasn't what she signed up for. She'd joined the force to protect people, not humiliate them. Around them, a few bystanders began recording. The quiet hum of the city had turned into murmurs and whispers. Grace noticed but didn't flinch. She simply stood there, breathing steadily, holding her ground. Mark straightened and smirked. "What's a woman like you doing with all this money?" He sneered. Grace looked him in the eyes. "Working hard. Something you might want to try." For a split second, Mark's expression faltered, then hardened. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to stop this, but she didn't know how. Every instinct told her this was going wrong. The crowd was watching. Grace's calmness only made Mark angrier. Emily could feel the tension burning between them, the kind that leads to something no one can take back. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the street. Grace stood quietly beside her car, her dignity unbroken even under unfair eyes. Mark glared at her, jaw tight, mind set on proving something that wasn't there. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, right there, was the start of his fall. Because when a man abuses power, truth always finds its way back to him. The evening air grew heavier as the flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. Grace stood quietly beside her car, the hum of traffic in the distance fading under the weight of the moment. Mark's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. "Put your hands on the hood," he ordered. Grace looked at him, her calm composure steady. "For what reason, officer?" Her voice wasn't defiant, it was controlled, measured, like someone who'd dealt with this before. Mark stepped closer, his boots crunching against the pavement. "Because I said so," he snapped. "Don't make this harder on yourself." Emily stood a few steps back, her hands clenched at her sides. Her heart pounded as she looked at Grace. She could see the quiet strength in the woman's eyes, the kind that came from experience. And then she looked at Mark, his jaw tight, eyes filled with something darker than authority. It wasn't duty anymore. It was ego. "Mark," she said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the cruiser's engine. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Let's just write a warning and move on." He turned to her, his tone cutting. "You still have a lot to learn, rookie. Don't question me again." Emily fell silent, frustration twisting inside her. She wanted to do something, but she was still new on the job, just 6 months into the force. Mark had 20 years of service and the kind of reputation that made people afraid to speak up. But still, this didn't feel right. Grace stayed still, her back straight, her gaze locked forward. "Officer," she said gently, "I understand you're doing your job, but please treat me with the same respect I've shown you." Mark let out a dry laugh. "Respect? You think you can drive into my neighborhood and tell me how to do my job?" Emily flinched. His tone wasn't just aggressive, it carried something bitter underneath. The way he said "my neighborhood" made her stomach twist. A few cars slowed down as they passed, drivers glancing curiously at the flashing lights. Across the street, a woman had stopped with her phone, quietly recording. The crowd was small but growing. Grace took a slow breath. "Officer Anderson, I've complied with everything you asked. Is there something else you need from me?" Her calmness only seemed to provoke him more. Mark walked around her car, peering through the windows, opening the back door without asking. "Yeah," he said coldly. "Let's see what you're hiding." Emily took a step forward. "Mark, you can't search her car without cause. We don't have permission, this isn't procedure." He waved her off. "You sound like a textbook. This is how you find the truth. Sometimes you have to look past the rules." Grace turned her head slightly toward Emily. "He's violating procedure," she said softly, almost like she was trying to protect her. "You don't have to be part of this." Emily froze. Grace's tone wasn't angry. It was kind, almost protective. That kindness cut deeper than any argument could. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Mark leaned inside the car, rifling through the glove compartment, his movements rough and careless. Papers fluttered to the floor. "Let's see what we've got here," he muttered under his breath. "People like you always leave something behind." Grace closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. The sting of those words burned, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "People like me?" she repeated quietly. "What exactly does that mean, officer?" Mark straightened up, meeting her eyes with a smirk. "It means I've been doing this long enough to know trouble when I see it." The tension between them felt electric. Emily could almost hear the pulse in her ears. She looked at the crowd again. 5, maybe 6 people now watching. Some whispered to each other. Others just stared silently, unsure whether to intervene. One young man called out, "She didn't do anything."
"Leave her alone!"
Mark's head snapped toward the voice. "Mind your business," he barked. The man stepped back but kept his phone pointed, still recording. Grace spoke again, her tone unwavering. "You're embarrassing yourself, Officer Anderson. And you're embarrassing your department." Mark's face flushed. He stepped closer to her, his voice low but sharp. "Watch your tone." Emily felt the words crawl under her skin. She couldn't take it anymore.
"Mark, stop."
she said louder this time. You're crossing the line. He glared at her. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. I'm not trying to, she said quickly, her voice shaking. But this isn't right. She hasn't done anything wrong. The air around them felt thick, almost suffocating. Grace looked at Emily, her eyes soft. Thank you, she whispered. Mark's hand twitched. For a moment it looked like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he turned away, pretending to check the trunk of Grace's car. He was losing control of the moment, and everyone could see it. Emily swallowed hard. We need to end this, she said quietly, mostly to herself. Mark ignored her. He crouched down by the car door, his face hidden from view. Grace's expression changed, confused, cautious. She couldn't see what he was doing, but Emily noticed something, a small plastic bag in his hand. Her heart skipped. Oh, he wouldn't, but he did. She saw it, his hand slipping the bag under the driver's seat. It happened in a second, but it felt like time stopped. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The crowd didn't notice, but she did, and once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Mark stood up, dusting off his hands, his voice loud and performative now. Well, he said, stepping back toward Grace. Looks like we've got a situation here. He reached under the seat and pulled out the same bag he'd just placed there. Care to explain this? He said, holding it up like a prize. Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. That's not mine, she said firmly. You just put that there. The crowd gasped, some shouting in anger, others whispering. Emily felt sick. She looked at Mark. He was smiling like this was some kind of game. Grace turned to Emily, her eyes pleading. You saw what he did, please. Tell the truth. Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her pulse pounded. She could feel Mark's glare even without looking at him. He didn't have to say anything, his silence was a warning. She froze. The truth was heavy in her chest, begging to come out. But fear kept her still. And in that silence the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which side she would choose. For a long moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the low hum of the police car's engine and the quiet chatter of the small crowd that had gathered. Grace stood frozen, staring at the small plastic bag in Mark's hand. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from fear, but from disbelief. That's not mine, she said, her voice firm but steady. You just put that there. Mark's smirk deepened. That's a nice story, Miss Williams. But it's not going to hold up. The words hit like stones. Grace's jaw tightened, but she didn't break eye contact. She could feel the stares from every direction, phones pointed, faces watching. She knew what this looked like. A black woman accused, a white officer with supposed evidence. It was a story older than she cared to remember. Emily stood beside the car, frozen. Her mind was spinning, heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She knew what she saw. She saw Mark slip that bag beneath the seat. She saw it as clearly as she saw the badge on her chest. And yet, she couldn't move. Mark turned toward the growing crowd, lifting the small bag higher, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, he said mockingly, looks like our fine citizen here was hiding something. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A few people murmured. Someone said, that's not right, but no one stepped closer. No one wanted to get in the middle of it. Grace exhaled slowly, trying to hold herself together. You're making a mistake, officer, she said quietly. You're crossing a line you can't come back from. Mark ignored her and looked at Emily. Bag it as evidence, he ordered. Emily didn't move. Carter, he barked, voice sharp. I said bag it. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at him. Mark, this isn't right, she said under her breath. His eyes narrowed, his voice turning cold. Watch yourself, rookie. You don't want to make this worse. Emily's mouth went dry. She could feel everyone watching her now. Mark's authority pressing down on one side, Grace's silent plea on the other. Her throat tightened. I can't, she whispered. Mark took a threatening step closer. What did you say? I said I can't. Emily repeated a little louder. Her voice cracked, but she didn't back down. You planted that. I saw you. The crowd reacted immediately. Murmurs turned into full voices. A few people gasped. Phones moved closer. Mark's face flushed. You're out of line, he shouted. You're lying to protect her. Emily shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, I'm not. I saw what you did. Grace looked at her, her eyes soft but strong. Thank you, she said gently. You're doing the right thing. Mark's anger deepened. "You don't know what you're talking about, Carter," he growled. "You're new. You don't understand how things work out here." But Emily didn't step back this time. "If this is how it worked," she said quietly, "then it's wrong." Mark's hand twitched near his belt, his face tightening with rage. "Do you want to lose your job?" "Because this will be the end of it." Emily's heart raced. For a moment she thought he might actually lash out. Not physically, but with words, with power, with everything he could use to destroy her career. But she didn't care anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only conviction. Grace's calm voice cut through the air like a steady flame. "You can threaten her all you want, but the truth is already out there." Mark turned on her, furious. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're just another liar trying to play the victim." Grace took a small step closer, her voice even. "And you're an officer trying to hide behind a badge. But that badge doesn't protect you from the truth." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Someone called out, "We're recording everything." Mark's eyes darted around. He could feel the walls closing in, the eyes, the phones, the whispers. His confidence began to crack, though he tried to hold it together with anger. "You people don't know what it's like out here," he shouted suddenly, his voice echoing across the street. "You don't understand what it takes to keep this city safe." Grace didn't flinch. "Keeping people safe doesn't mean breaking the law," she said. "You've forgotten what your uniform stands for." Mark took a slow step toward her, his voice dropping low enough that only she and Emily could hear. "You think you're smarter than me," he hissed. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" Grace met his glare. "I don't think, Officer Anderson," she said softly. "I know," Mark's jaw clenched. He turned away, looking for a way out. But the damage was done. Emily's words hung heavy in the air. The truth had already started spreading through the crowd. One woman from across the street shouted, "We saw it." "He planted it." Others started talking, their voices rising. Emily's hands trembled. She'd spoken the truth, but the fear still lingered. What would happen now? Would the department back her, or would she be crushed under Mark's influence? Grace stepped closer to her, speaking in a low, calm tone meant only for her. "You did the hardest thing already. You told the truth. Don't let anyone make you regret that." Emily nodded, her throat tight. I didn't want to lose everything." Grace gave a faint, sad smile. "If you lose your integrity, you've already lost everything that matters." Those words hit Emily deeper than anything she'd heard in years. It reminded her of her father, the man who raised her on those same principles. She blinked back tears, the noise of the crowd blurring into the background. Mark turned around again, voice sharp, trying to regain control. "That's enough. Everyone put your phones away. This is an active investigation." But no one listened. The people kept recording. The truth was no longer his to control. Grace looked around at the faces watching. Some were angry, some hopeful, all waiting for justice. She straightened her jacket, meeting Mark's eyes one last time. "This isn't over," she said firmly. Not by a long shot. For the first time, Mark didn't have a comeback. He looked at her, and for the briefest second, behind the anger and arrogance, there was something else. Fear. He turned away quickly, pretending to make a call on his radio. But his hands shook. Emily watched him and realized something she hadn't before. Bullies always look powerful until they're forced to face the truth. Then they just look small. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Someone must have called for backup. The crowd began to shift, whispering louder, phones still raised. Grace stood tall beside her car, calm and unbroken, even as chaos unfolded around her. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her strength was quieter, the kind that speaks through presence, not words. And as the red lights flickered across her face, Emily knew something had changed forever. This wasn't just a bad call anymore. This was the moment everything would unravel. The moment when truth, long buried under silence and fear, finally began to rise. The noise from the small crowd was growing louder now. The blue and red lights flashed across faces filled with disbelief. The smell of gasoline and late evening air mixed together, heavy and tense. Grace stood beside her car, calm but deeply aware that everything around her was spiraling. Mark was pacing near the patrol car, trying to look in control, but his voice had started to crack. He barked into the radio, his tone sharp and panicked. "We have a situation here requesting immediate backup." Everyone could see the sweat on his forehead. He wasn't in charge anymore. He was desperate to look like he still was. Emily stood near the car, frozen between duty and justice. Her throat felt dry, her mind spinning in a storm of guilt and fear. She had just spoken the truth, but her words still echoed in her head like an alarm she couldn't silence. You planted that. I saw you now. She didn't know what would happen next. Grace turned her head slightly, her eyes calm but fierce. You don't have to be afraid anymore, she said softly to Emily. He can't silence both of us. Mark heard it. His jaw clenched. He turned around, his face twisted in anger. Excuse me? He snapped, stepping closer. Did you just threaten me? Grace looked directly at him. No, I'm reminding you that the truth doesn't need to shout. It's already speaking loud enough, the crowd murmured. Someone from across the street called out. We saw what happened. Phones were still raised, lights blinking. Mark looked around, realizing that everything he'd done, everything he thought he could hide, was being recorded from every angle. His confidence cracked further. You people don't know the full story, he shouted, his voice breaking slightly. You don't understand what it's like to deal with criminals every day. Emily's heart pounded. She couldn't stay quiet anymore. She's not a criminal, Mark, she said firmly. You made her one. He turned on her, his eyes wild. Watch your mouth, rookie. You've just ended your career. Emily swallowed hard but didn't look away. If standing up for what's right ends my career, she said, her voice trembling but steady, then so be it. The crowd gasped again. Grace gave Emily a look filled with quiet pride, the kind of look only someone who's been fighting battles for years can give. Mark took a step toward Emily. His voice dropped, sharp as a knife. You have no idea what kind of power I have in this department. You'll be gone by morning. Emily felt her legs shaking, but she stood tall. Maybe, she said softly, but at least I'll still be able to look in the mirror. For the first time, Mark had no quick comeback. His eyes flickered with something, rage mixed with the sting of losing control. Grace exhaled slowly, steadying the storm. You think you can scare everyone into silence, she said, her voice calm but cutting. But courage doesn't answer to fear. Mark glared at her. You don't know anything about courage. Grace's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Actually, I do. She reached into her jacket pocket slowly, carefully. Both officers tensed, Mark out of paranoia, Emily out of instinct. The crowd grew quiet, all eyes fixed on her. Grace didn't flinch. She pulled out a small leather badge holder and flipped it open. The gold insignia gleamed under the flashing lights. I'm Captain Grace Williams, she said firmly, her voice echoing over the noise. Newly appointed commanding officer for this precinct. Silence. Complete silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The weight of her words hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Emily's eyes widened. She felt her stomach drop. Captain Mark froze. The color drained from his face. That's not, he stammered, his voice cracking. That's not possible. Grace stepped closer, her gaze steady. It's very possible, Officer Anderson. What's impossible, she said slowly, is the way you've just treated your superior. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps. Someone shouted, She's his boss? Another said, You're done, man. Phones were still filming, catching every second. Mark stumbled back a step. You never said who you were. Grace's eyes narrowed. I didn't have to. It shouldn't matter who I am. Every citizen deserves respect, not suspicion. Emily blinked rapidly, trying to process what was happening. She felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Grace wasn't just another victim. She was the boss. The woman who had just been humiliated by one of her own officers now held the power to change everything. Mark's voice wavered, desperate now. Captain, I didn't know. I was just following protocol. Grace's tone turned firm, commanding. Protocol? You broke every rule in the book, officer. You profiled me. You searched without cause. You planted evidence. Mark's hand shook. I can explain— No, she interrupted, her voice like steel. You can't explain integrity. You either have it or you don't. Emily stood still, her heart racing with a mix of fear and admiration. Watching Grace, she saw what real leadership looked like. Not through anger, but through strength held steady by principle. The crowd began clapping quietly, then louder. Someone yelled, That's justice! Grace didn't smile. She wasn't celebrating, she was making a point. She turned to the people watching and spoke clearly. This isn't about rank, she said. It's about what's right. Every person deserves dignity. no matter the color of their skin or the car they drive. Mark's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. He looked small now, not in height but in presence. The badge on his chest no longer gave him power. It looked like a burden. Grace looked at him one last time. "Officer Anderson, hand me your weapon and your badge. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation." His face went pale. "You can't do this." "I just did," she replied calmly. Mark's hands trembled as he unhooked his badge, the metal clinking softly against his belt before he handed it over. The sound was final, like a door closing on a career built on arrogance. Emily watched the moment unfold, her eyes stinging with emotion. She had been afraid of losing her badge, but now she realized it meant nothing if it didn't stand for truth. The crowd broke into applause again, not wild cheering, but something deeper. It was relief. It was hope. It was the sound of a community watching accountability happen in front of their eyes, maybe for the first time. Grace turned to Emily, her voice gentle now. "You showed courage today, Officer Carter. That's what this badge should mean." Emily swallowed hard. "I was scared," she admitted quietly, "but I couldn't stay silent anymore." Grace nodded. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she said softly. "It's doing the right thing despite it." As the sirens grew louder in the distance, the weight of what had just happened settled over everyone. Mark stood there defeated as the flashing lights danced across his pale face. Grace didn't gloat and she didn't turn away. She simply said, "The truth always finds its way home." And for the first time that night, the air around them felt lighter, as if justice had finally decided to show up. The street was still alive with flashing lights and whispers. What had started as a simple traffic stop had now turned into something that felt much bigger, a reckoning. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were witnessing change happen right in front of them. Grace stood tall, her presence commanding without raising her voice. The air seemed to bend around her calm. Her badge gleamed faintly under the red and blue light, reflecting both authority and the truth that had finally come to light. Mark, once full of arrogance, now stood silent, his hands twitching slightly at his sides. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavier than his vest, heavier than the years of power he had carried without question. Grace took a slow breath and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her eyes were sharp but not cruel. "Officer Anderson," she said quietly, "do you understand what you've done?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the pavement, jaw tight, chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "You used your position," she continued, her tone measured and deliberate, "not to protect but to humiliate. You crossed every line this badge represents." Still no response. His silence was louder than shouting. Emily stood nearby, her own uniform feeling heavier now. She watched Grace with quiet awe. This woman had just been through one of the most humiliating and dangerous moments imaginable. Yet she stood like a storm that had found its center. Grace's voice softened, not out of sympathy but truth. "You thought no one would stop you. You thought the system would protect you like it always has." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "But what protects people like you is silence." And tonight that silence broke. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some clapped softly. Others recorded in silence, capturing every word. Mark finally lifted his head, his eyes red, his pride cracking. "You think you're better than me?" he said bitterly. "You don't know what it's like out here. You don't know what we deal with every day." Grace didn't flinch. "I do know," she replied firmly. "I've spent my life on these streets and not hiding behind prejudice, but facing it. And you know what I learned?" She took a small step closer. "The uniform doesn't make you better than the people you serve. It reminds you that you're no different." Mark looked away. His hand shook as he ran one over his face, as if trying to wipe away the truth. "I've given 20 years to this department," he muttered, his voice quieter now. "I've seen things you wouldn't believe." Grace nodded slightly. "Then you should have known better." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between Grace and Emily. "You're going to ruin me," he said, the edge of panic creeping in. "No," Grace said calmly. "You did that yourself." There was no anger in her tone, only honesty. At that moment, 2 patrol cars pulled up behind them. The screech of tires broke through the silence as uniformed officers stepped out, looking from Grace to Mark, confusion on their faces. "Captain?" one of them asked cautiously, recognizing her. Grace nodded. "Officer Anderson is suspended effective immediately," she said. "Escort him to the precinct. He's to surrender his service weapon and badge." The officers hesitated, glancing at Mark. He looked back at them with pleading eyes, but they could see it. The scene, the cameras, the crowd, and Grace standing unshaken. There was no rescuing him this time. Mark's voice cracked as they approached. "You can't be serious, Captain. I've dedicated my life to this job." Grace's tone remained firm but steady. "Protecting the public isn't the same as abusing power. Mark, you forgot why you started wearing that badge." As the officers moved to take his weapon, he resisted slightly, his pride clinging to whatever was left. "I was only trying to do my job," Grace cut him off sharply. "No, you were trying to play God, but even God listens before he judges." The words hit harder than any punishment. His shoulders slumped. He unhooked his badge, placing it in her hand. The metal felt cold, lifeless, a symbol that had lost its honor. The crowd erupted into low cheers and clapping. It wasn't mockery. It was release, the kind that comes after years of frustration finally being seen. Grace turned to the people watching, raising her voice just enough to carry over the sound. "This badge," she said, holding it up for everyone to see, "is supposed to mean protection, not fear. Justice, not abuse. Tonight we start making sure it stands for that again." The crowd's applause grew louder. Someone shouted, "We need more like you." Another voice called out, "Finally, someone's doing what's right." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. For months, she had questioned whether she was strong enough for this job. She'd seen small wrongs, words, glances, silence. But she'd never imagined witnessing something like this. And she'd never imagined having the courage to stand against it. Grace turned to her. "Officer Carter," she said softly, "you made a choice tonight, one that many don't have the courage to make." Emily swallowed hard, her voice small but sincere. "I was scared, Captain. I still am." Grace's gaze softened. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you didn't let fear win." Emily nodded slowly. Her chest ached, but for the first time it wasn't from guilt. It was from relief. Mark, now handcuffed, turned toward Grace. "You're making a mistake," he said bitterly. "You're turning everyone against me. I was one of the good ones." Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Good men don't need to prove it by hurting others," she said simply. "You had the choice to be better, every single day. You just never took it." He didn't reply. The officers led him toward the patrol car. The crowd parted silently as he passed. He kept his eyes on the ground, his reputation falling apart with every step. Grace watched until the door closed behind him. The sirens wailed again as the car drove off, carrying away the man who once thought he was untouchable. The air felt different now, lighter, yet heavy with meaning. The crowd lingered, talking quietly, their cameras still recording. For them, this wasn't just about one officer. It was about something deeper, proof that truth could still win, that accountability was still possible. Grace turned back to Emily, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said. "Don't ever forget how powerful that is." Emily nodded, her voice trembling. "I don't know what's going to happen next." Grace smiled faintly. "You'll be fine. You have what this badge needs most, a conscience." A few reporters had arrived now, cameras flashing, microphones ready. One called out, "Captain Williams, can we get a statement?" Grace turned to face them, her posture straight, her tone measured. "What happened here today," she said, "isn't just about one officer. It's about accountability. It's about restoring faith in those who wear this uniform. The people we serve deserve honesty, and that starts with us." The crowd cheered again, not loudly, but sincerely. Grace exhaled, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Some hopeful, some emotional, all changed. She knew this was only the beginning. There would be investigations, reports, endless questions. But she also knew that change didn't start in meetings or memos. It started here, on a quiet street under a fading sun where one truth finally broke through years of silence. Emily looked at her one last time before they got into the patrol car. "Captain," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up." Grace smiled, her voice calm. "Justice doesn't give up, Emily, it just waits for the right moment to be seen." The sirens faded again into the night, leaving behind a street that would never forget what happened. The night truth stepped out of the shadows, and Karma finally came wearing a badge. The night had finally begun to settle, but the city didn't feel calm. Lexington's streets were quieter, yet there was a strange current in the air, the kind that hums after truth has been dragged into the light. Grace sat inside her office hours later, the blinds half closed. The desk lamp threw a warm glow across stacks of reports and half-finished coffee. Her badge lay on the desk beside her notebook, catching the faint light. She hadn't gone home. She couldn't. Not yet. Emily stood near the doorway, her posture straight but her eyes unsure. The events from earlier still echoed in her mind. The crowd, the flashing lights, the way Grace had faced it all with calm strength. "Come in, Officer Carter," Grace said softly without looking up. "Close the door." Emily obeyed, the door clicking shut behind her. For a second, she just stood there, hands clasped, trying to steady her breathing. Grace finally looked up. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed the weight of the night. "You held your ground out there," she said. "I know that wasn't easy," Emily swallowed. "It didn't feel brave, Captain. It felt terrifying." Grace nodded slowly. Courage usually does. She leaned back in her chair. "You spoke truth in front of everyone. Your superior, the public, the entire department watching through their phones. That's something most people never find the strength to do." Emily hesitated, then stepped closer. "What happens now?" "To him? To us?" Grace's expression hardened slightly. "There will be an investigation. Internal Affairs has already been notified. Every piece of body cam and every video from that crowd is being collected." Emily nodded, her fingers twisting nervously. "Do you think they'll actually act on it?" Grace smiled faintly. "They'll have to. The truth isn't a rumor this time. It's recorded, witnessed, shared. You can't bury evidence when the whole world has seen it." Outside the window, the faint hum of city traffic rolled by. The world hadn't stopped, but something inside both women had shifted, like a door opening after years of being locked. Grace turned toward Emily again. "You know what the hardest part about leadership is?" she asked. Emily shook her head. "It's realizing that sometimes the rot isn't in one person. It's in the roots," Grace said quietly. "Mark was just a symptom of something bigger, a system that forgets who it's meant to serve." Her words hung in the air. Emily's throat tightened. "You think the department won't change?" Grace leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "Oh, it will. But change doesn't start with speeches. It starts with people who refuse to look away, people like you." Emily looked down, her voice small. "I almost did look away. For a moment, I froze. I didn't want to lose my job." Grace's tone softened. "You didn't freeze. You chose when it mattered. That's what defines you." Silence filled the room again, heavy but peaceful. A knock came at the door. Sergeant Lopez, a steady, middle-aged officer with kind eyes, stepped in holding a folder. "Captain, the statement from the witnesses just came in. You should see this." Grace took it, flipping through the pages. Dozens of signatures. People who had seen what happened and wanted to make sure it wasn't erased. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said quietly. Lopez hesitated. "Captain, a lot of us out there are proud of what you did tonight. It's been a long time since we saw someone stand up like that." Grace offered a small nod. "Then don't just be proud. Be different." He smiled faintly, then left, closing the door behind him. Emily let out a slow breath. "He's right, you know. Everyone saw how you handled it. You made people believe in this uniform again." Grace's eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. "One night doesn't change everything, but it starts a conversation, and that's how revolutions begin." She stood, walking toward the window. The streetlights below glowed in small pools of gold. "You see that?" she asked, gesturing at the quiet road outside. "That's where it starts, in ordinary moments. A traffic stop. A decision. A choice to do right when no one expects it." Emily followed her gaze. "Feels strange," she said quietly. "How one wrong act can open the door for something good." Grace smiled faintly. "That's karma for you. It doesn't rush, it waits, and when it arrives, it doesn't ask permission." They stood there in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. The distant sound of a siren drifted through the night, fading into the city's rhythm. Grace finally turned back. "Tomorrow morning, there'll be reporters outside this building. There'll be people asking questions, some honest, some not. You need to be ready." Emily nodded. "What should I say?" "The truth," Grace said simply. "That's all that's ever needed." Later that night, the precinct hallway echoed with quiet footsteps and tired voices. Officers came and went, some stopping to glance respectfully at Grace's office. For the first time in a long time, that building didn't just feel like a workplace. It felt like a place where something sacred had been restored. In the locker room, Emily sat on the bench, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. Her uniform looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. The badge she once wore out of duty now felt like a promise. She thought of her father, his voice calm and steady, telling her when she was young, "Integrity isn't about what you do when people watch you. It's what you do when no one can see." She smiled faintly through tired eyes. For the first time, she felt like she had honored that lesson. Down the hall, Grace was still in her office. She was writing her report, every detail, every word chosen carefully. She didn't want this case buried in paperwork or twisted by politics. She wanted it written in truth. When she finished, she looked at the clock, nearly 3 a.m. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion catching up to her. But when she glanced again at the small framed photo on her desk, a picture of her late mother, she found strength again. Her mother had been a teacher who always said, "Justice begins with patience." Grace smiled. Tonight proved her right. As dawn began to touch the horizon, the first light spilled through the blinds, washing the room in pale gold. Emily returned quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here," she said softly. "So are you," Grace replied with a small smile, taking the cup. Emily sat across from her. The 2 women didn't need to speak for a moment. The silence was its own kind of peace, a shared understanding that something irreversible had begun. Grace finally broke the silence. "You know, I used to think real justice was about punishment," she said. "But it's not. It's about change, and change always starts with truth." Emily nodded, her voice warm. "Then tonight was justice." Grace looked thoughtful. "No, Emily. Tonight was the beginning of it. Outside, the city was waking up. Birds cutting through the pale morning sky, cars starting to hum along the streets. The world moved on, unaware that inside that small precinct a spark had been lit. Grace finished her coffee, stood up, and straightened her uniform. "Let's get ready," she said quietly. "We've got work to do." Emily rose beside her, the 2 women walking toward the hallway bathed in the first light of dawn. The floorboards creaked softly under their boots. As they stepped out into the morning, Grace paused by the glass doors, looking at the street where everything had happened just hours earlier. She could still picture the crowd, the flashing lights, and the moment truth found its voice. The memory didn't haunt her. It strengthened her, because she knew that day wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about rebuilding faith, one act of courage at a time. And as the sun rose higher over the city, Captain Grace Williams and Officer Emily Carter walked out together, ready to face a world that finally knew what real justice looked like. Not power in uniform, but integrity in motion. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Lexington, painting soft streaks of light across the quiet city. The world had moved on from the chaos of last night. But for the people who had witnessed it, and especially for Grace and Emily, life would never be the same. By the time Captain Grace Williams stepped out of her car and into the precinct, a small group of reporters had already gathered near the front steps. Cameras clicked, microphones extended, voices overlapping with questions about the incident that had taken over every local headline overnight. Grace didn't rush. She walked with steady purpose, her uniform crisp, her gaze calm. The flashing cameras didn't intimidate her. The truth was on her side now, and she had no reason to hide. "Captain Williams, do you have a statement about last night?" one reporter called out. Grace paused briefly, her tone composed. "Yes," she said. "Accountability isn't about punishing people. It's about rebuilding trust. That's what we're doing here." She didn't wait for follow-ups. She simply turned and walked through the glass doors, the kind of silence that follows respect trailing behind her. Inside, the precinct buzzed quietly. Some officers stood straighter when she passed. Others looked away, uncertain how to face her. But Grace didn't need applause or pity. She needed action, and she intended to make sure last night wasn't just another story that faded away. Emily sat at her desk, nervously sorting through files. When she looked up and saw Grace, she stood immediately. "Morning, Captain." Grace smiled faintly. "Morning, Officer Carter." You get any sleep? Emily laughed softly, shaking her head. Not much. Grace set down her folder on the desk beside her. Good, that means you're thinking. Thinking is the first sign you care. Emily relaxed a little, her shoulders easing. How bad is it? She asked. Grace sighed. The city's watching us now. The department's under pressure to clean house. And Mark's case, well, let's just say his lawyers are working overtime. Emily hesitated. Do you think he'll ever admit what he did? Grace shook her head. Maybe not. But it's not about his confession anymore. It's about the evidence, the truth, and the message we send next. As they talked, Grace noticed the faces of a few young officers lingering nearby, watching, listening. She smiled slightly. You see them? She whispered. They're waiting to see what kind of leaders we become after this. Emily followed her gaze, nodding slowly. They're scared too, she said softly. Grace's voice lowered. So were we. The difference is we didn't let fear decide for us. That afternoon, a meeting was held in the department's conference room. The city's police chief, several senior officers, and members of the review board were all present. Grace sat near the head of the table, her composure unwavering even as the tension in the room thickened. Captain Williams, the chief began. We've reviewed the initial reports. There's no denying Officer Anderson's misconduct. But this case has drawn national attention. You've put this department in the spotlight. Grace met his eyes calmly. With respect, Chief, corruption did that, not me. The room went quiet. Even the chief leaned back slightly, caught off guard by her directness. Grace continued, her voice firm but steady. We've lost public trust. Every day people doubt if we're on their side, and now they have reason. It's time we stop hiding behind silence and start earning back respect through truth. One of the senior officers, older and skeptical, spoke up. You're suggesting we expose every flaw we have? You'll break morale? Grace looked at him. Morale isn't built on secrets, she said. It's built on honesty. The good officers deserve to be proud of their work, not ashamed of someone else's crimes. Emily sat at the far end of the room, taking notes quietly, but listening intently. Grace's words filled her with a mix of pride and awe. This wasn't just about that one night anymore. It was about transformation. After the meeting, as the board dispersed, the chief lingered behind. You've made enemies today, he said quietly. Grace met his gaze. Then I'm doing something right. That evening, the precinct issued an official statement. The video from the traffic stop had gone viral, but instead of denying or spinning the story, they acknowledged it. Grace's voice echoed through the press briefing, firm and clear. Justice isn't damaged when we hold our own accountable. It's restored. The city responded with an unexpected wave of support. Emails, letters, and calls poured in, from residents thanking her for standing up, from retired officers who wished they'd done the same years ago, and even from parents saying their kids now believe that the badge could stand for something good again. Grace read a few of those letters late that night, sitting at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. One of them stood out. It was from a young black woman who wrote, For the first time, I don't feel afraid when I see those flashing lights. I feel seen. Grace folded the letter carefully, a small, proud smile touching her face. In the weeks that followed, real change began to take root. The department started new training programs focused on ethics and accountability, not because of a PR order, but because Grace insisted it was non-negotiable. Every rookie would learn not just procedure, but humanity. Emily was assigned to lead community outreach alongside Grace. They visited schools, spoke with neighborhood groups, and listened to people's fears and frustrations. It wasn't always easy. Some voices were angry, some skeptical, but every conversation mattered. One afternoon, as they left a meeting with a local youth center, Emily turned to Grace and said, You really think people can change, don't you? Grace smiled softly. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. Emily looked thoughtful. What about him, Mark? Grace's eyes drifted to the horizon. Sometimes karma doesn't punish. It teaches. Maybe one day he'll understand what he lost wasn't just a job. It was his honor. They stood there for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange, the same color as the evening when it all began. But this time, the air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. Grace turned to Emily, her tone warm but steady. Do you know why I stayed calm that night? Emily shook her head. Grace's eyes softened. Because I've learned something in this job. Power is loud, but truth is patient. You don't have to shout to win. You just have to stand your ground. Emily nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. You really believe one act of courage can change everything? Grace smiled, her gaze fixed on the glowing sky. It already did. Weeks later, a new plaque was installed in the precinct lobby, one that read, "Integrity is doing what's right when no one's watching." Underneath it, in smaller letters, dedicated to those who choose courage over silence. Emily walked past it every day, touching the edge of the plaque like a reminder. She'd made mistakes, she'd felt fear, but she'd also found her purpose, the kind of purpose that doesn't come from authority but from conscience. And Grace? She kept leading, not as a captain who demanded respect, but as a woman who had earned it. The officers under her command began to see policing differently, not as control, but as service, not as power, but as trust. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Grace finally took a rare day off. She walked through her neighborhood park, coffee in hand, the spring breeze soft against her face. A little girl ran past her, pretending to be a police officer, waving a plastic badge. "I'm Captain Grace," the child shouted proudly. Grace stopped, her heart swelling. The girl's mother smiled shyly from a nearby bench. "She saw you on the news," she said. "You're her hero now." Grace chuckled softly, kneeling to the child's height. "Well," she said gently, "if you're going to be Captain Grace, promise me one thing." The little girl nodded eagerly. "What?" "Always tell the truth," Grace said, "even when it's hard." The girl grinned and ran off again, shouting, "Yes, ma'am." Grace watched her go, a quiet smile spreading across her face. The sun was rising higher now, warm and golden, just like that night so long ago when everything had changed. Karma hadn't come in anger or revenge. It had come in truth, and in the quiet bravery of people who chose to do what was right. Because justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to scream. It simply waits in for the right moment to rise. And on that day in Lexington, Kentucky, it finally did.